let's kick things off. So as mentioned today, what we're going to be focusing on is a feature specific to Operations Hub Professional, custom coded workflow actions. For anyone out there who doesn't know what Operations Hub Professional is, or Operations Hub, in fact, it is a suite of tools that HubSpot has provided for revenue operations team, RevOps teams. And they really have three core focuses. They focus on reducing data silos, so using our data sync tool to connect various systems to HubSpot and ensure that your team has the most up-to-date data that it possibly has. It also focuses on keeping that data clean and well formatted, and that's done using our automation tool. So we have data formatting built in, but we also have custom coded workflow actions for more advanced business processes that you may want to build. And this is what we're going to be focusing on today. This is the ability to create your own logic within the HubSpot automation tool to solve for those various processes. And you can do that using JavaScript in a Node environment, or you can do it using Python. And for any Python fans out there, I've included Python this week as well. So there's a bit of an ask for that after our session last week. So that is going to be a feature of this week. So we're going to be addressing both and looking at an example. But yeah, that's effectively what we're going to be doing. One thing I'd also say is that this deck that we're looking at now, I won't be going through it, but I will be sharing it after the session. And it's done in such a way that you can follow along. So if it is a case that you're, for whatever reason, you lose track, you're not able to keep up, or you just want to listen, take notes, this deck will go out afterwards, and it has all of the steps and the links that you need. So you're not going to miss out on anything at all. So don't worry. We'll also be sharing the recording of the session as well. And what I would say as well is we're going to keep questions to the end. We have an hour, which is a long time, but it's not really when we have a lot to get through. So I will be going as fast as I can to a reasonable capacity so that we're not rushing things. We have a lot to cover in that short space of time. And I'm hoping then by the end of all of this, I can open it up to questions, and we'll also follow up with any questions we can't answer. So to kind of set the scene, what we're going to be doing today is, and you might have done this last week if you attended the session, no problem if you haven't, we're going to be going to the developers.hubspot.com website, and we're going to be clicking on the orange button to create a developer account. That'll bring you through a few steps to sign up. It's all free. What you'll end up with is an interface like this, which is what we call a developer portal within HubSpot. And these are special accounts special portals rather, that allow developers to create and manage their applications. If they're wanting to install applications across multiple HubSpot portals, maybe they're building an application for our marketplace and they want to manage the listings. Maybe they want to just review our documentation or link off to our forums. What we're particularly interested about today, and I think in my opinion, one of the best features about this, is the testing component. So within these accounts, you can click on the testing tab and you can create up to 10 test accounts. And these last for 90 days. They can be manually renewed at any stage. But they provide you with a blank canvas really to build on HubSpot, to try the functionality, to connect third-party integrations, and really get a feel for the way our systems work. So we're going to be creating a test environment that we can build out all of the stuff that we're doing today. What we're also going to be doing is creating an account with Kickbox, because this is the third party that we want to use. So you can navigate to kickbox.com and click on the blue button to get started for free. And effectively, what Kickbox is it's an email validation platform, email verification platform, and a very advanced one at that. What it does is it basically maintains an overview as to the deliverability and various other metrics relating to various email addresses. So what you can do is you can query Kickbox, and it'll actually return, for example, whether an email is a valid email, whether sending communications to that email will result in a bounce, whether it's deliverable or undeliverable or risky. It also scores emails using what they call the Sendex score, which is a score between 0 and 1. So you can kind of standardize or group emails based on their Sendex scores in HubSpot and begin to create very segmented lists off the back of that. They also have some really interesting features around saying if an email address is role-based, your support at email, your sales at, whatever at, whether they're free addresses, whether they're temporary email aliases, lots of really great features. So we're going to be using that today to actually build out an example within Operations Hub. And the reason we're going to be using this is quite practical in terms of how it can help us. From the marketing side of things, maintaining the integrity of your emails within the CRM and your database for your marketing efforts is crucial. You naturally want to keep your bounces to an absolute minimum in order to keep your deliverability rates and your overall reputation to an optimal standard. So using a service like Kickbox can help to ensure that you're only sending emails to valid email addresses that aren't only syntactically valid, i.e. they look and feel like an email address, but are verified and can receive those communications. On the sales side as well, the benefit to this is, if you're reaching out to people who have maybe provided invalid email addresses, well, maybe it's just a waste of time. So, creating maybe tasks off the back of emails being invalid or valid for your sales team to follow up, as the case may be. And fundamentally as well, it's understanding the mechanisms of how Operations Hub and custom-coded automation works. What we learned today, what we go through today, hopefully will give you a foundation on which to build upon and maybe look to use this in other situations and scenarios. If you set up the account with Kickbox, you'll have a dashboard like this, and we'll get back to that in a moment. You can see, I've been doing some testing in February, early Feb, and I did some today before today's session to make sure everything was okay. This is a way I can monitor my requests and manage my API keys and a lot more. So I'll be coming back to that. And as I say, we're going to be using the email verification API, which allows us to verify a single email address. Now, it's true, they also have batch verification APIs, which you're free to use as well, but it makes more sense in this instance to use the single verification because we're going to do it as and when a contact is added to the CRM. And I will also mention, we have all the code today available on GitHub. So I think Jan will be sharing that in the chat. So don't worry, that will all be shared with you. There's 4 examples in there, just for context. The first example is using JavaScript, using the HTTP library to make a request to Kickbox, and the data is returned, and we handle it accordingly. The second example is also in JavaScript. It's using Axios, which is also used for HTTP requests. Slightly different. It can result in a smaller amount of code to do effectively the same thing. It's a little bit more efficient. So I shared that for transparency. We also have a Python example. So example number 3 would be in Python. And then example number 4 is using a combination of Axios. It's in JavaScript, Axios to make the request. And it's using our Node client, HubSpot's API client, to actually use our APIs to update the contact properties. So there's a good mix of examples there that hopefully touch on all the key aspects. And as I say, you'll have that to work from as we move forward. And in essence, then, what we'll end up with today is we'll have some properties here. So last week we created properties because a very important component is we need to store data somewhere. So last week we were querying Clearbit. So we were getting data back and we were storing it in company properties. This week we're going to be querying Kickbox and we're going to be getting data back and we're going to be storing it in contact properties. So we'll be creating some properties to hold that information. And I can see, I just saw there on the side of my, this will be recorded and the slides will be shared. So do not worry, we'll make sure that this is all sent out. We will be creating properties to hold this data. And then what we'll effectively be doing is we'll be building a workflow. So this is one I built earlier for each of the examples so that we have them to fall back on if we need to. But you can see here, a contact is going to be created. We're going to run some custom code that is going to communicate with that third-party service. It's going to send us back some data, and we're then going to copy that data that it's returned into the various properties we created. And if you'd like, then you can see if maybe the email is valid, i.e. it's going to accept email, it's deliverable, well, then it's good. We don't need to do anything. If it isn't, well, it's bad. Maybe we would delete the record. We'd have a custom coded action to delete the contact, or maybe set a property to mark them as, do not send or whatever the case may be. So you can branch off then off the back of that and use this in other tools like our list tool and our workflows and reporting tools as well. And as I say, there's 3 different examples here. We're not going to build all 3 on the call. I'll be focusing primarily on example number 1, but I will also touch on the Python example to cater for the language preferences of everyone out there. So without further ado, we'll jump straight in. It might also be helpful for me to show you the finished product. So let me just jump into my CRM here, and you'll see this in action. So you'll actually see I've got a couple of contacts here. I have got my contacts overview, and I've got the different properties that I'm capturing this information from Kickbox. So you can see our role addresses. No, they're not role-based addresses. Free addresses, yes, one is because I used a Gmail account to sign up. So that's a free address naturally. Disposable addresses, are they temporary? No, they're not. We have our Sendex scores, which is a categorization mechanism by Kickbox. The different result or reason for that result is also being passed through. And we can store that. And if I was to actually create a contact, you'll see this in action. So let's do support@kickbox.com as an example. And I'll just do support Kickbox. Now, in reality, contacts can come in. They could convert on your site. They could sign up for a webinar and sync into HubSpot. They could be imported manually or in bulk using a list. You might have other systems integrating with HubSpot, sending contacts in. Contacts can come in a variety of different ways. I'm just adding one manually here, but I'm going to create this contact. And what you'll see here is the contact successfully added. That's brilliant. At the moment, we don't have any data to work from. And actually, I think rather foolishly forgot to turn on any of these workflows, so nothing will happen. So what I'll do is I'll manually enroll the contact in the workflow, and we can actually see this in action. So if I turn this workflow on, and I'll roll the contacts, and I'll navigate back to the tool. In a second, we should see that data populate. And that'll just give you a taste of what to expect. This is the finished product that we want to get to. So we should hopefully see in a couple of seconds. There we go, support Kickbox. It is a role-based address. It's a support alias. It's not a free address. It's not disposable. And you can see here the results. So it's coming up as risky and low quality. I'm sure emailing Kickbox is not risky and it's not low quality, but given the nature of they likely service their paying customers, there's probably firewalls and that type of thing to ensure that emails are getting through and routed correctly, but gives you a flavor of what's possible. So let's jump in. So if you haven't already, developers.hubspot.com, create the developer account, and you should be on a screen that looks like this. If you're not, simply just click on the testing tab. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a test account. So as I mentioned, these last for 90 days. You can manually renew them at any stage, and you can have up to 10 of them. I'm going to call this Kickbox email verification and create. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just click into this account, and we're ready to go. The other thing then we'll need to do at this point is we're going to navigate into settings. So on the top right-hand side of your HubSpot account, you can navigate into settings. We're going to open a link in the new tab or whatever way you'd want. And we're going to go into properties. And from within here, we're going to start creating the properties to hold the information that we're getting back from Kickbox. So we've got our contact properties. That's what we want to create. So what I'm going to do is I'll create a group, and I'll call it Kickbox information, and save. And then from within that group, I'm going to add some properties. So the first property that I'm going to add is, and I'm actually going to just reference my properties here on a separate screen so that I don't make any mistakes here. But the first property I'm going to add is disposable address. So is it a disposable address? And what's interesting here is, and I think I touched on it last week that we didn't do it, properties can hold different types of data. We're going to be dealing primarily with Booleans, which are either true or false values, checkboxes, for example. We're going to deal with some enumeration fields, drop-down values, and we're going to be dealing with some numeric values for the Sendex score. So this is quite interesting because we can see how to deal with that in the context of a coded action. So what I'm going to do here is create a disposable address to hold information as to whether the email is, in fact, disposable, true or false. I'm going to create another property, very similar, under Kickbox information, and it's going to be for free address. Is it a free address? And again, this will be a single checkbox, true or false. I am also going to create another one for role address. Sorry, I keep doing that. Kickbox information, role address. So is it a support at, sales at, admin, or whatever at address? And that again is a checkbox value. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a numeric property to hold the Sendex score. So it's going to be Kickbox information and Sendex. And what we're going to have here is we're going to store a numeric value, and it's going to be an unformatted number. We don't want any formatting. There we go. And then the last two I'll create are the reason and the result. So again, it's Kickbox information. It's going to be result. And this time what we're going to use is we're going to use a drop-down value. And this is going to have several options. Now, the options that we look at here can be found within the Kickbox API documentation. So you can see here when we make this request, it's actually going to send us back different types of information. So for result, it will send us back deliverable, undeliverable, risky, or unknown. So what I can actually do is navigate to HubSpot and I'll type in deliverable, undeliverable, risky, and unknown. Okay, so effectively what we've done there is we've defined our different drop-down values. One thing to be mindful of as well is that label and internal value are two different things, and it's important to note the differences here. This internal value is what the API is concerned with. Now, by default, HubSpot will always match the internal value. If you add something, it's going to be exactly the same. But if we navigate back to the Kickbox documentation, this could be the same for another service, you'll see that it's all lowercase. Okay, so case sensitivity is a big thing. So what we actually would need to do as well is just make sure that the internal values are all lowercase so that we don't run into any complications when it comes to actually mapping the data in. And we're going to click create. And we're going to do the last property here, which again is a drop-down property, Kickbox, and it is this time for the reason. So reason will hold, if it was deliverable, why is it deliverable? Or if it's undeliverable, why is it undeliverable? What's the reason for that? So we're going to call this reason. And this is, in fact, a drop-down select. And it's going to have some values here. The first one is invalid email. I'm going to make sure this matches what Kickbox would be returning, invalid underscore email. It's going to have invalid domain. I'm going to make sure, again, the internal value is relevant to what Kickbox returns, invalid domain. I'm going to keep going through these. Rejected email. So did the server reject the email? That's obviously a potential outcome here. Accepted email. Did it accept the email? And as a result was deliverable. Accepted email. And I think we have a few more to add here. For reference, again, it's all found here. This is basically the list I'm referencing. This is what we're trying to input as our property values. We also have whether it's low quality, a low quality email address, where deliverability is questionable, and for all intents and purposes, you'd likely, good shout. Someone got me, typo there. Always the nature with doing this on the fly, so appreciate that. We have our low quality addresses, and I'm just going to add the last few in very quickly here. Low deliverability. And you get the idea here. You can add various properties here that are going to capture the data and actually hold the information, okay? And it's a good exercise to get used to because it just gets you into that mindset. Timeout. This is the most boring part of the session. Don't worry, you get the interesting stuff now, but we just have to do the groundwork to get all of this working. And invalid SMTP. Invalid SMTP. And the final one is unavailable SMTP. So maybe they're having issues with their SMTP service, and as a result, the email just cannot get there. SMTP. Okay, so in essence, we've got a long list of emails. I think there's even one more that I might have missed. There is unexpected error. Now, in the event that we didn't add this, it's not like it wouldn't work. It's just that we wouldn't be able to store that information. So it's just a good exercise to ensure that you're catering for all possibilities here. Unexpected error. And create. So there we go. So at this point now, we've got all of our properties ready, and we are ready to start building out our custom coded workflow action. So what I'll do at this point is I'll click on automation. I'm going to click on workflows, and I'm going to open up that in a new tab. And from within here, we'll create a workflow. And I'm going to call this example number 1, make request to Kickbox email validation. And this is the JavaScript example, okay? And what we can do here is we'll start from scratch. Anyone out there who isn't familiar with the workflows tool, it's HubSpot's automation engine. You can use it for marketing automation, automating internal processes on the sales side for lead rotation, a variety of use cases. You can also automate off of different records in the CRM. So we're interested in contacts. We're going to use contact workflows and click next. And the structure of a workflow will be the same regardless of the record type. In this case, we're looking at contact records. We could equally be looking at company records, but we want to define the enrollment criteria. So what has to happen in order for the workflow to execute? So in this instance, we want contacts to be created. Anytime they're created, we want a contact to come in here and whatever we have after that to be executed against that record. And you'll see here, there's a whole host of different actions that are available to us. I'm not going to go through all of them, but on the operations side, the most important is the ability to send webhooks, create custom code, and format data, which allows us to choose from a load of predefined formulas to format data accordingly. In this instance, I'm going to be using some custom code, so I'm going to add that there. And we'll start building this out right now. Node.js is the environment we're going to be building in, JavaScript. And we're going to add some secrets. Secrets are ways to handle API keys so that you're not exposing sensitive information to people viewing your code. We'll be adding some secrets in a moment. And in fact, I'll do that right now. So the very first secret we want to add is our Kickbox API key, because that's going to allow us to make requests to the Kickbox API. So we're going to click Add Secret. We're going to give it a name, Kickbox API. And you see it's expecting a value. So what I'll have to do is go to my Kickbox account, click on API here. It's going to bring me into a screen like this. You may not have exactly the same. I've been using this previously. But you'll see the ability to manage keys. So within here, what we can do is you can create a new key. And it gives you the option to create two keys. So I can give it a name. I'll just call it Jack's awesome API key. Two modes, sandbox and production. We're interested in sandbox. This just allows us to verify single email addresses. Production allows you to also batch verify emails and check the balances in terms of credits you have in terms of email validation. But sandbox will work. Either will actually work, but we'll stick with sandbox. And you'll see off the back of that what we get now. And in reality, you wouldn't be sharing this with people, but this is a test. You'll get an API key. And this is basically your unique key to access Kickbox's services. So take a copy of that. I jump back over to HubSpot and I just paste that value in. That's all I need to do. If we were using HubSpot to our API client, and one of the examples does, I'd also add another key, and I might call it API key. And the secret value would be the HubSpot API key. And to get that, I'd go into my settings, integrations, API key, and I would create a brand new key. And again, you wouldn't want to share this with anybody. If someone has this, they can access data in your HubSpot account. But this is, again, a workshop. For security reasons, if someone was to, it's worth noting you can always deactivate a key or rotate a key. So you can restrict access immediately. We're also going to paste that in. That's just if we wanted to use that at a later stage. So we've got two API keys that we can use. The other section of a custom coded action is the ability to include inputs. So we can actually include properties from the CRM. And this avoids us having to use HubSpot's API keys to pull in this information unnecessarily and preserve rate limits. So we're particularly interested about people's email addresses. So I'm going to use the email property, and I'm going to reference it in my code with the name email. What we'll see here then, I'm going to zoom in on this. In fact, I'm going to make it full screen. I am going to make it dark, and I will zoom in so that we can see. So hopefully that's a little bit more visible. This is where we're going to actually write our code, okay? This is really where the heavy lifting happens. Now, structurally, the general way it works is that towards the top, you're always going to have your imports. So you can import your libraries. Line number 3, this is our function. This is where the code is actually going to run when the action gets executed. That contains all of our specific logic. There's also some very important pieces within here. You'll see we have a callback. This is basically a function that runs at the end that returns some data output. And then what we can do is we actually, if we scroll down, we can capture or create variables to hold that data output so that we can use it later on. So there's a couple of moving parts to this, but we're going to build this all out. Now, what I will do for the sake of time, because there's still quite a lot to get through and we're at the halfway mark, is I'm going to navigate to my repository that I created before this session, and I'm going to take example 1. So I'm actually just going to copy this entire thing into the code here and click there. And I'll walk through exactly what this does in a bit more detail. I've also added comments so that if you're looking at this later on, you'll see exactly what's happening. But we want to make a request to a third party, so we use the request library. Exports.main, this is our function that's going to run. It contains all of the logic. You'll see if I was to minimize it, all of the code is gone. So it's all contained within that function. What we then have on line 7 is we're creating variables to hold some information. So I'm creating some variables to store information when Kickbox gives me back the data that I'd like. The role, the free, is it free, disposable, the results and the reasons, that the Sendex score. What I'm also doing is I'm creating a variable to hold the email of the contact. So that's what I defined up here in the properties to include to code. And that's the information I'm sending out to Kickbox. And I'm actually doing that here from line 11 to line 15. This is where I'm building my HTTP request to call their API. So what I would do here is I would have referenced the documentation on the Kickbox side. I can see that it's a GET request. I can see this is the endpoint I need to hit. I can see it takes 2 parameters. It takes an email, it's required, and it takes my API key, that's also required. It gives me back something like this. So what I can then do is come back in here and I can build that out. So I define the method, it's a GET request. It could be a POST request if we were maybe updating data, or a patch request, or delete request. My URL, the endpoint I'm going to post to, or send data to rather. And you can see here I've actually added in some variables here. So rather than creating a static string, I've actually included the email of the contact. This will be updated based on whoever's in the workflow. And then I've also referenced my secret, my Kickbox API key, so that that's pulled in. Then on line number 4, what we're doing is we're actually processing or making the request and then handling the response. So we make that request to Kickbox and it will return a response to us. And what I can do here is I can then parse that response. So it would be in a JSON format, which is just a lightweight way of exchanging data across the web. Some systems will return XML. And what I can do is I can parse that response and store it in my variables, as you see here. And what I'm free to do then is pass those variables back to the workflow in the output fields, this JSON object here. So this is effectively what the code is doing. As I say, there's a couple of other examples there. They're all commented, so hopefully it's helpful. But what we also need to do here is this output field, we need to make sure that these data outputs match. So what I mean by that is, for example, we're returning all this information to the workflow. We need to define the types of information that we're expecting to receive. So Boolean, role. So is it true or false, yes or no? Is it a valid email, or is it a role-based email? We have another Boolean for free. We have another disposable, we have a Boolean for whether it's disposable or not. Disposable. What we also want to do is Sendex. So that's a numeric value. So we're going to choose the number data type, Sendex. Oops, Sendex. And then we also have our results. So we've got their enumeration. So our result, I'm going to call it result. And what we're going to do here is we're going to say, is it deliverable? Is it undeliverable? Is it risky? Or is it unknown? And then we've got our final data output enumeration here. And this is reason. And to be quite honest with you, what we would be referencing then, again, is back on the email verification documentation. We'd be making sure that we're pasting in these various options into that field. So we'd make sure that we have those different options. So I'm going to do that very quickly. And this time I'm just going to copy and paste them. So the idea here is that this workflow action will make a request to this third-party service. In this case, we're using JavaScript, the HTTP library, and the data that we get back, we can pass back to the workflow. We can really do what we like with it. You may even have a custom coded action a bit further down that you might want to do something else in and use this data in. So you can begin to chain all of this information together and create quite an advanced process within HubSpot. Of course, here's quite a simple implementation. We're just learning the basics and making sure that we have a tangible, functioning, working example that we can build upon. So once this is done, we can actually test it, and I'll show you exactly what we can expect to see. And I will run through the Python example, and then I think we'll be good, providing it all works, and we can open it up to a Q&A. We're still good on time. Very conscious of the time because there's quite a lot to get through when you're doing it on the fly, as you can imagine. But what we can see here is great. We've got our options ready to go. So the next thing I would do then is, just to be safe, I'm going to save all of this. So I'm not going to lose my work. I've got my data output fields defined. I've got my code in place. My secrets are there. I've got my input properties there. What I can do now is I can actually run a test to see what's going to happen. So let's actually choose, okay, I have 2 test contacts here in the database. Let's just choose the Brian Halligan test contact and see what we get back from Kickbox. So you'll see here straight away, the data output fields we just supplied have all of the information that Kickbox was returning to us. Okay, so we actually have an overview of whether this will actually accept email. What I could also do, just to show you this fully in action as well, I might just create a contact on the fly just to make sure that we're not doing, so I might just create a contact here, and I'll just, again, Mac Hansen at irfu.ie. So that's hopefully the guy on Saturday that can help us against the French. I'm a big rugby fan, so not sure there's any rugby fans out there, but I certainly am a big fan of it. So create that contact. And what we can then do is we can navigate into our workflow. Might need to refresh just so that it picks up that change. And we'll put Mac Hansen through, and unfortunately that isn't his email address, so he's going to avoid any fan mail from me. But let's see. Let's test that. So you can see, okay, so in this instance, yeah, Mac Hansen has come back and we're getting a result from Kickbox. So we're basically getting different results based on the contacts that we're using. And all of this is happening using custom coded automation. The next thing we want to do though, is we want to copy the values from that output field. So this is where things get interesting. So I can actually then begin to use the copy property value option. And you can see here I can choose custom code. I could choose other properties to copy from, but I want to copy from custom code outputs. So I'd say I want to copy whatever is in the free data output to the free address property. I'd do that again. I'd say copy set property value or copy property value. And this time I might say I want to copy from disposable data output to the disposable address property, and so on and so forth. And we'd actually continue to do that for each of our respective fields. Now, you might say, well, this takes a lot of time, and it can, depending on how much data you're dealing with. So that's why I included an example using the HubSpot API client, because in some instances, it may make more sense to actually do this programmatically in the custom coded action if you're dealing with quite a lot of data. So do keep in mind that that's an option, but I did just want to break this down step by step so that you can see this in action. And I think repetitiveness, doing things over and over again, at least for me, can help it to kind of stick in my mind. So hopefully it's all helping to understand the mechanisms and the workings of this. So the last two, I think, here are copy property value. I think we want to copy from the result, and we want to copy into the result. And we do the same thing for the reason. So we're just copying the values from the output into the respective contact fields. Reason. Apologies. Let's see, custom code and reason. And then I think the last one was the sendex. So that's the final property, copy property. And we're doing, I know I'm flying through this, but like, don't worry if you can't keep up, because I appreciate it's a lot to take in. That's what the slides they put together are for, the code snippets are for, and the recording is for. So do not worry if that's an issue. And then we basically have our workflow built from start to finish. Now, what I can do at this point is I can actually turn that on, and it's ready to go. And effectively what will now happen is as and when contacts are added, this workflow will trigger and my custom code will execute and I'll copy the values. I could do the exact same thing with Python, and I could do it very, very quickly. So what I could actually do is I could clone this. I could actually clone this workflow. I could call it example 2, and this is for the Python fans out there. I never thought I'd say that, but there you go. There we go, and we save that. And in example number 2, nice to see this as well. If you're not overly familiar with how workflows work, you can clone workflows and you then retain the entire structure of the workflow. So you don't have to go reinventing the wheel each time. And this time what I can do is I can simply go to my repository. I'll take our Python example here.
Oh, it seems he is back.
I am back, and apologies. Something completely out of my control. The electricity from my entire apartment block went, so apologies for that. Very convenient, as it was fine all day, but Thank you, Jan, for keeping everybody entertained. And I'm very sorry for that disruption, everybody. But at least we got through the crux of it. I think we hopefully got to a stage where everybody saw the workflow action being built out. And as I say, the deck is going to be sent out and the code is there, and the like. I wonder, would it make sense for us to maybe open it up for a Q&A? Is there questions out there? Yeah, I see someone saying I'll have to go even faster now. I'm good, but I'm not that good. It's the truth. Maybe we could open it up to the room. Does anyone want to see the Python example? I'm happy to show you that and just walk through what it's doing. If not, I'm happy just to open it for a Q&A. Because at the end of the day, I want to just make sure that everyone that attends gets the most out of this. So there's, I think, a few yes pleases. So yeah, we will, absolutely. And again, very sorry for that. Typical, these things happen, but it is what it is. Nothing we can do about it. So let me share my screen and we'll start again. So hopefully everybody can see that again. And what I'm actually going to do, if it's okay, is I'm going to reference directly from my repository, if that's all right, just because I noticed that there was a few issues in terms of the indentation. So I will fix that. But in terms of building in Python, it's much the same. So it's the same custom coded action, it's the same flow. The only difference is you're defining your runtime environment. So we're using Python here instead of Node. And structurally, or from a coding perspective, there's a couple of things to be aware of. So just like the JavaScript actions, you can import your libraries. So what we're doing here is we're importing our requests in our JSON library. That's so we can make requests and also manage the JSON response that comes back to us. It's useful to note that with HubSpot's custom coded automation from a Python standpoint, we support everything that is provided as part of the standard libraries that come with it. So it is actually quite extensive. I'm actually going to show you here, 0.6. There is actually standard library. There is a ton of various different packages you can leverage for all sorts of creative and weird and wonderful things you might be doing. We're just using a very small component of that. But depending on what you're actually doing here, you can import them towards the top of your code here. So you can hopefully see here that I'm bringing in those libraries. Now, next, similar to JavaScript, we've got this function. And this takes an event, which is contains data relating to the contact or the object enrolled in the workflow. And everything from this point on is what's going to be executed when we get to this block of code. So in this instance for Kickbox, what I've done is on line number 10, I'm getting a reference to the contact's email and storing it in a variable. Line number 11, I'm building out the URL, the endpoint that I want to make a request to. I'm making sure I place the email and the secret into that string. And then I'm actually making a request and storing it in a variable. So I'm making that request and getting some data back. Now, what Kickbox will return is some JSON data, just like it would have for the JavaScript example. And that's just the nature of one of the good things about RESTful APIs, and like it's uniform and consistent. So regardless of the language of choice, you're going to get the same format of data back, which is great. But it's how we then parse that response that we can begin to work with it. So what I do on line 15 is I use the JSON library to basically convert that response into what's known as a dictionary in Python. And I'll also caveat, my Python is not great. So I will throw that out to the room, but I'm more of a JavaScript person. But a dictionary is a way of storing data. It's a container of data in Python, and it's key value pairs. So what we can actually do here is we can convert that dictionary, that response into a dictionary, so we can begin to reference it in our code. So the way you would reference dictionaries or values within dictionaries is using this type of syntax. So you can kind of see here what we're doing is we have a result variable, we've got our data dictionary, and within there's a key value pair where we have result and then the value of the result, and that's going to pull in that value. Dictionaries are unordered and they're mutable. So what I mean by that is they can change, and the unordered piece means that we have to reference values using keys like this. You can't use indexes or numbers. So that's what we're doing here. If you'd like, this is optional, but it's useful to see in the action itself. You can iterate through the entire dictionary, and this is helpful because you can see the key value pairs, and what the data is structured like that you're actually using. But then really what we're doing, just like the previous examples, is we're passing data back. We have our output fields here, and we're making sure that we're including whatever data we got here within that output field, that JSON response object. And that really is all there is to it, albeit my very limited knowledge of Python. That is the crux of making a HTTP request with the Python environment and language. And hopefully for any of, I'm sure there's people on the call that are much more proficient than I am, that at least gives you an idea of how to approach this. So again, very sorry for the disruption. It's just something I couldn't control. I'm glad it happened towards the end and not kind of towards the start. Hopefully we finished on a high note. I am going to pause for a second because we've covered a huge amount. As I say, we're going to be sharing all the slides. We're going to be sharing the recording. You'll have to fast forward for the bit where I drop off. We'll be sharing the code. But what I'd also say is, before we take questions, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to, I share a lot of stuff on LinkedIn, videos, tips, tutorials, articles. I'd even love just to pick up a conversation afterwards with you on LinkedIn if you want to drop me a message. Tons of resources here we'll share with you. And we're running 2 other sessions later this month as well. Next week, we'll be looking at building a referral program, using Operations Hub and Marketing Hub. And the week after that, the final week, we'll be looking at actually connecting to an external database and querying that database using Operations Hub. So I'll pause now and I'll maybe hand it over to Jan for Q&A. And again, I really appreciate your patience, everybody, and thanks for working with us through that technical issue.
No worries, Jack. I mean, it was out of your control, and I was trying to keep everyone here entertained to my limited capabilities. But thanks everyone for staying on. We'll head on over to the Q&A part of this workshop. The first question was asked by Daniel way at the beginning of this workshop. Daniel asked, how do we validate an email with custom code before we redirect them to the confirmation page and access to the downloadable asset? Daniel is trying to reduce the usage of bogus emails to access various HubSpot assets.
Yeah, so it's a great question. So in reality as well, when you think of your website, you're likely going to implement validation on the front end of your site. So on the form itself. So in other words, when someone tries to put in an invalid email, or it's going to return a response and it won't allow them to submit the form. Now that is entirely possible to do, but it's not done using Operations Hub. Operations Hub typically happens after the fact. The reason I wanted to use this example was because more often than not, contacts are coming in from multiple different sources, not necessarily just the website. But what you could do if you're interested in going down that approach, form embed code, I can share this with you. HubSpot. This might be helpful here. If you embed a form on a HubSpot page or on your own website, what you can actually do is you can actually customize it or and tailor it to meet your specific needs. There's a couple of handlers you can use that will listen for things happening, and you can execute some logic off the back of that. So, for example, and this is very much an overview, so we could go a lot deeper into this. You'll see that there's all of these different handlers down here. So when the form is ready, when the form is being submitted, when the form has been submitted to HubSpot, you could create some custom logic on the front end of your site that would actually check to see if the email is syntactically correct using a regular expression so that it matches a pattern. What you could also do, if you'd like, is you could make a request to Kickbox from, in that manner. Or you might have to have a proxy whereby, I don't think Kickbox lets you make requests on the front end, but it will return the same data. So there's ways to do it. It wouldn't be quite this way, but the way I did it this way was because data is coming in from all sorts of resources.
All right, next question is by Christoph. In the beginning of learning to program, there is a lot of trial and error involved. Would you recommend starting out in an IDE for a project before moving into the custom coded action in a workflow?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would recommend it. Yeah, and in full transparency, even in preparation, when I'm doing things, I typically will use an IDE. So I use Visual Studio. And the benefit of using an IDE is that stands for integrated development environment. The benefit to using that is it's got much better, it's called linting and indentation and checks for syntax, and it's color coded and it's easier to see. And it does really ensure that it's got autocomplete and stuff. It ensures that you're being fed with all the information you need to make sure your code is functional and working. It's true that within the custom coded editor, it's certainly not as advanced as an IDE. I don't think it would claim to try and be. But yeah, if you wanted to, I would highly recommend doing this outside first, just to make sure structurally it's okay. Then paste it in and run a test.
All right, next question is by Stacy. Can you reference the custom code in a delay until action? For example, waiting for a record in a third party to be updated before continuing with the workflow.
Yeah, great question. So at present, you cannot, at least that I'm certain of. Yeah, so we can actually, yeah, so we can delay based on certain actions happening, but we can't actually, actually there is a way to do this now that I think about it on the fly. So technically you can't do it off of the outputs of a custom coded action. But what you could have, for example, is your custom coded action executes, it updates a property, and then you could actually delay until a property value is changed. So it could be that there is, a flag that's checked, and when that property is checked, the action proceeds. What I'd say though is you've also got to consider some of the constraints that you're working within. Custom coded actions have a max runtime of, I think it's 20 seconds. So if your logic is going to take any longer than 20 seconds, it's going to fail. So factor that in, but I think I would start looking at it from this perspective, certainly.
Right. The next question is by Christoph again. What are the best resources to get started with the basics of programming? Christoph said he's not a complete idiot, but still at the start of his programming journey. He started with an app called Mimo, I think. What would you recommend?
Yeah, so Google is your best friend first and foremost. There's so much on Google. There's a couple of great resources, and I might even we could include these in the follow-up in our community post. But Free Code Camp is one. Free Code Camp is, as the name suggests, free, and it's a way of learning to code. There's tons and tons and tons of tutorials. I follow them on LinkedIn as well, and I actually have on my phone a bookmark of all of the cool tutorials they have. I would highly recommend. Another good one is Code Academy. Code Academy, sorry, make a mistake there. This has a free option, but it also has paid plans. So I think I have a pro plan myself. This is a great way to kind of run through different sessions, and it's kind of gamified, earn medals, that type of thing. There's tracks and very in depth. Udemy is another resource to consider. Yeah, and of course there's tons of books, but I prefer using these interactive kind of elements too. So I think that Google, attending sessions like this, learning from people that are in the same realm as yourself is the way forward. Yeah.
Thanks. The next question is by Mark. We have around 500 contacts created every week via API. Would batch email validation work better here? Yeah,
it's a good call. So certainly when you're dealing with a high volume of data, batching calls is much better. Now, I actually believe Kickbox has an integration with us that can batch validate emails and lists from HubSpot. In fact, I'm almost 100% sure they do. So what you could do here, for example, is explore Kickbox. There we go. They do have an integration here that will or should batch update various lists. So that, anyway, in short, yes, if you're dealing with a lot of data, to keep within the rate limits that you're working with, batching is ideal. What I'd say is workflows, a custom code won't help there though, because you think about it, they are executed in relation to a specific contact flowing through. So you don't necessarily have that data to work with. There's probably ways to do it where you trigger one contact and you could get the others and batch requests, but yeah, I probably need to put more thought into that one.
Next question is by Samantha. For the code that we copied over, would we need to create it ourselves, or does HubSpot have a library?
Yeah, so we do have a library. Programmable automation use cases is what it's called. Really, this is a collection of all sorts of use cases with custom code. Now, What you'll actually have is if you click into any one of these, so I might deal renewal management as an example. So you can see here, gives an overview of what that code does. It's a colleague of mine, actually, Amin, on my team, who created this snippet. If you click on Discover, it'll bring you through to, similar to the repo we were just in, all of the code. And it should just be a question of copying and pasting. You may need to make a few adjustments depending, but that's what the commenting is for, and make sure you're well, you know what has to happen. But yeah, we do provide a library of code snippets to make life a little bit easier, and we try to add to that very, very regularly.
Right, next question is by Joseph. How would you recommend using this custom code on current contacts in a database?
So what I would probably recommend there is, but it depends on the use case, first and foremost. What you could do potentially, if we take the Kickbox validation example, when you enable workflows for the first time, you have the option of choosing to enroll contacts moving forward or contacts that meet the criteria at the time you turn it on. So if you wanted to run a batch job of all of your contacts in the database, you could turn the workflow on and enroll everybody that has existed before you built that workflow out. That's certainly an option. It really just depends on the use case, to be quite honest with you. Yeah.
I think we'll have to leave it at that. There's two more questions, but we'll answer them in the resources in the community tomorrow. I'll hand it over back to you, Jack, to close us off.
Yeah, well, again, I hope that this session was useful. If you leave with a better understanding of anything to do with custom coded automation, that I think in itself is a success, and I hope it was enjoyable. Again, apologies for the tech difficulties. Thank you for hanging on. Next week, we'll have a similar session, and the week after we will as well. Please feel free to connect on LinkedIn. I'd love to pick up the conversation with you afterwards, and all of these resources will be shared, and any questions we didn't answer, we will get to via a community post tomorrow. So thanks again for your patience. It was a pleasure to speak with you all, and I'll see you next week.